know you have a bee to thank for 1 in every 3 mouthfuls of food that you eat? Honeybees perform around 80% of all pollination. No bees, very little food. It's clear that bees clearly enjoy a synergistic relationship with their natural world. And yet it's almost daily headline news now that one or other species is in decline. Our wildlife is in free fall. Here's a nice quote from Sir David Attenborough. "We're replacing the wild with the tame. 50% of the fertile land on Earth is now farmland, and 70% of the mass of birds are domestic, most of which are chickens. Humans make up just over 1/3 of the mass of mammals on this planet, and about 60% are creatures that we raise to eat. That leaves only 4% of mammal mass on this planet for every other wild mammal, from mice to whales. Wouldn't it be nice if we, like the bees, could learn to live more synergistically with the rest of Mother Nature's creations? Now, I'm not about to solve the problem in a 10-minute talk, but based on the principle that every little helps, here are perhaps 5 lessons we could learn from our fellow beings. Lesson number 1. At the height of summer, a colony of honeybees contains about 80,000 bees. 75,000 of these are the worker bees, the females. 5,000 are the drones, and there is 1 queen. Each bee has a clearly defined role within their community. The worker bees start life as cleaners. They clean out the new cells to receive an egg. They then progress to being nurse bees, looking after the brood, the baby bees, and the eggs. When they're about 10 days old, they can start to create wax, with which they repair and create the honeycomb and cap the wax. 2 to 3 weeks old, and they learn to fly, initially as undertaker bees, then as foragers. They gather the nectar, which is the carbohydrate, and the pollen, the protein, for their hive brothers and sisters back in their hives. They live for about 6 weeks. The drones have just one role, to mate with a virgin queen. They're only needed in the swarming season, in the spring and summer, when the new queens are created. Drones from several different colonies gather in mating grounds about 30 meters up in the air. With their especially big eyes, they wait for the virgin queens to come along. The queens can mate with up to around 15 drones on their 2 to 3 mating flights. The drones, however, get just one go, because if successful, their genitals explode and they die. If they're not lucky enough to mate with a queen, their sisters eat their wings and throw them out of the hive at the end of the summer. The queen also has just one role, to lay eggs. In the height of a summer, she can lay 1,500 eggs every day, and she can live for about 5 years. Wouldn't it be nice if we, like the bees, could each value each other's contributions to our communities? The bees all have a very clearly defined role. If they didn't all exist, their communities would fall apart. Without the drones, they can't reproduce. Without the queens, they really fall apart. And without the worker bees, the hives become infested. There is no food, and the young bees die. Okay, so I'm not about to propose the solution. I'm no sociologist or politician, and I'm not about to create some nirvana version of society, but perhaps there is just one small thing we could do. Maybe next time you're in a situation where you perhaps are meeting somebody that you feel is a bit inferior or superior to you, you could say hi, wave at them, ask how they're doing. I thought it was interesting how during lockdown, people that were normally casual workers suddenly became key workers, how we all realised that without these smaller roles in our communities couldn't function. Lesson number 2. To make a jar of honey, a bee has visited around 2 million flowers, flying 60,000 miles or 1.5 times around the world. The flowers are very clever. They grow in nice bright colours and they offer sweet nectar and nutritious pollen to attract the pollinators. The bees come along and gather the pollen on their hairy bodies, which they then take to another flower, thereby pollinating that flower and creating seeds. These seeds are not only food for other creatures, but they also grow flowers for the following year. A true win-win-win, real synergy. Wouldn't it be nice if we, like the bees, could create our food chains to be this synergistic? If the food that we ate not only benefited our own bodies, but also our local communities and the planet in general. According to Surfers Against Sewage, every year 8 million pieces of plastic pollution enters our oceans. 100,000 mammals and over 1 million birds are killed each year because of the plastic pollution entering our oceans. Single-use food and beverage packaging is one of the main culprits. Maybe next time you're faced in a supermarket with that great big array of beautifully looking plastic-packed fruit and vegetables that have been shipped from India or Kenya or Chile, you could reconsider. Could there be a more local, a more sustainable, a more seasonal product that comes from your local environment that you could choose instead? Lesson number 3. Bees are, kind of, vegetarian wasps. Unlike bees, most wasps are actually parasitic. They lay their eggs inside other insects. Whilst the wasps don't actually eat the insects, they feed on nectar, aphid honeydew, and a syrup made from their larvae. They actually feed these larvae bits of insects that they have killed and chopped up. It's thought that bees probably evolved from hunting wasps who developed a taste for nectar and decided to become vegetarian. Fossil evidence is sparse, but it's thought that probably bees originally came about the same time that flowering flowers did, sometime in the Cretaceous period, about 146 to 74 million years ago. So nowadays, bees are vegetarian. They will kill an animal if threatened or attacked, but they don't eat it. Another quote from Sir David: "We need to change our diets. This planet cannot survive by supporting billions of meat eaters." Wouldn't it be nice if we, like the bees, could at least cut back on the amount of other creatures that we eat? Lesson number 4. Only 3% of the wildflower meadows that existed in the 1950s are still around today. 3%. 150,000 miles of hedgerows and about half of all the ancient woods, as well as this 97% of wildflower meadows, have been destroyed in the last 70 years. The flowers that grow in these wildflower meadows, in these hedges, create vital food for our pollinators. Not only do these pollinators create the food that we eat, but they themselves are also food for other creatures. If they disappear, then so do we disappear. Have you ever noticed how much more birdsong you hear when walking through a field of flowers or a beautiful verge than when walking through a golf course or a well-manicured lawn? Those of us who were around in the 70s will remember the routine of cleaning splattered insects off the windscreen of a car after a summer's drive. Have you noticed how clean the windscreens are nowadays? It's estimated that in the last 50 years, the mass of insects in the planet has halved. Wouldn't it be nice if we, like the bees, could create our natural environments to be this important to our well-being, in fact, our very existence? Maybe the next time you are tempted to pick that dandelion or to sprinkle some weed killer or praise your councils for keeping our verges nice and tidy, you could reconsider. Perhaps next time you see that weed, you could thank it for being a wildflower. Finally, lesson number 5. There are 20,000 different species of bee in the world, and about 250 different species of bee in the UK. Each of these species pollinates a different type of flower. This is due to the length of the pollinators' tongues. It's a little bit like that Aesop's fable. Do you remember the one about the fox and the stork? The evil, cunning fox invites Mrs. Stork around for dinner. He creates a beautiful stew, which he proffers in a shallow bowl. He sits there in delight as he greedily sups his stew, while the poor embarrassed stork with her long beak can't eat anything. Unperturbed, Mrs. Stork invites him back the week later. She makes a beautiful casserole, which she serves in a long vase. She sups hungrily, enjoying her stew, delighting in the frustration of the poor fox who can't eat anything. Now, whilst this fable is, I'm sure, intended to teach us do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, or something like that, it's a really good example of how different bowls, or in our case flowers, will appeal to different mouth sizes, or in our case pollinator tongues. Okay, so back to the bees. If the wide number of wildflowers were reduced, then so would the number of pollinators reduce. If the number of pollinators is reduced, then the wide range of wildflowers can't survive, and nor can the food they subsequently become. This sounds ridiculous, I hear you say. This could never happen. At the moment, in California, there are 1.3 million acres of land that grow just almond trees. This is far from natural. These almond trees need honeybees to pollinate them. Remember what I was saying about the different tongues? Honeybees are perfect for pollinating almond flowers. Every January, about 70% of all commercial bees in America are shipped to the Californian almond fields. That's about 2 million hives. Unfortunately, these bees become ill. They're only feasting on one type of plant, and their immune systems suffer. Variety is surely a good thing. Wouldn't it be nice if we could truly value the differences around us, value the different plants, the different flora, the different fauna we have around us, and value the different types of human beings? So what if a magazine or a social media post tells you you need to be bigger or smaller or lighter or darker or fatter or thinner? We are all beautiful, just like the bees. Let's nurture nature and enable nature to nurture us. Thank you.